Hi everyone, I am Melanie Ewan. I am one of the co-founders and managing partners of Volition, and we are an international advisory firm who happens to have 11 incredible advisors who all specialize in a different area of expertise to help address kind of common pain points and knowledge gaps on a startup journey. And Chris and Colin are two of those incredible advisors that we happen to have in our team. So if you haven't been to one of our AMAs yet, just to give you a little bit context about how it's going to go, essentially what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually introduce Chris and Colin, a little bit of an intro for Chris and Colin here today. And then I will pass the reins to Chris and Colin. It's going to be a little bit of kind of an interview style AMA, but do contribute your questions. And essentially I'm going to pass on your questions to Chris and Colin, and they know their areas of expertise better than I can possibly convey to you, so they will put their hand out for, yes, this is my area, I'm going to speak to this. Or of course, if you want to direct a questions to specifically one of them, you can do that as well. And just indicate that in the Q&A and I will know. So that's how this is going to play out. Again, whether you are on Facebook or Zoom, please do say hi and submit your questions. And after the session, what I'm going to do is I will download the recording and I'm going to put it on YouTube. It's also going to live forever on our Facebook page, so you can come back and hear all the wisdoms into the future and beyond the future.
Forever.
Yes, forever. Yes, okay. So I'm going to stop talk. Oh, actually, I did want to mention that I have this slide up here so that you know how to get a hold of Chris and Colin. I'll also put this into the chat right now, as well as at the end, so you know how to get a hold of them on email, as well as Pick My Brain, which is the tool we use to help people book knowledge and expertise sessions with our advisors, so you can check them out there. And I'll also put their LinkedIn in the chat so you can connect with them, because I'm sure that they would be more than happy to connect with you on LinkedIn. Yes, okay, so without further ado, I think I had another slide here just to show you, in case you didn't know, I saw someone do this in an event recently and I actually really liked it, just showing what it looks like to you as the viewer, because we actually have a very different view back here behind the scenes. So it's nice to see that you have chat, raise your hand, and Q&A, like I said. So please do take full advantage of that and ask us all your questions, do all the chats, all the things. And make sure that you are sending, so you see here in this picture on the screen, it says to all panelists. That's kind of how it's the default setting, is what I'm trying to say. And so you can go click on the little down arrow and go to all panelists and attendees, and then everyone who's here can actually see you talking, and we can have a bit more of a community vibe going on, which if you know us at Volition, that is definitely what we're about. So please do make sure you're talking to all the people, because we would love to see that. Alrighty, so back to Chris and Colin, who we're here for. There we go. All right, so actually I'll just stop sharing at this point so you can see all of the faces. So I'm going to intro Colin first. So Colin McWhinnie, I don't know where he is in your Brady Bunch screen, but he's just down here for me. Yes, just say hi. Yeah, just wave so we know. That's probably easier. Okay, so Colin's a Volition advisor specializing in startup sales coaching and consulting. He's also founder and CEO of Canada Startup and brings 20 years of experience in startup sales and biz dev. Brings that to the table. So it's a very quick introduction. You'll learn a lot more about Colin and who he is and what he knows as this hour goes by, but I don't want to take up too much of the time. So Chris, introducing Chris as well, also a Volition advisor, helping companies find their road to revenue. So he brings an incredible wealth of expertise and experience in money modeling. He's a money model specialist. You can ask him what that means. Also a senior associate at Canada Startup as well. Okay, so again, very brief, because I want to jump into the good stuff. I've been talking to these two and they know so much. And what we wanted to start with is something that we've heard coming up over and over and over again on our channels and surveys we've sent out, just in chats that myself and these two have been having with different people in the community, which is really people want to know what they can do right now. So they're asking questions like, should I be approaching clients right now? Should I be approaching prospects right now? Or should I kind of leave it? What's up with the timing right now? I don't know what to do. Can you give me advice on my best next step? So I'm just going to start with kind of that big, broad conversation and hand it off to Colin to take it from here.
Great. Well, thanks, Mel, and thanks for all of you to be here today. Very excited to do this. And To answer that question, I would unequivocally say you absolutely should be in touch with clients and prospects right now. One of the things that actually you should be doing, first of all, is protecting your base. And if you've got customers right now, just checking in to see how they're doing and what kind of help that they do need will give you, it's almost doing a discovery session with them. You know, it'll give you an idea, first of all, if your service or product in any way can help them with some of the urgent matters that they're going through right now. Is there a way for you to pivot to help them? Or is there just even some way that you can introduce them to somebody in your channel, another company that might be able to help them? Growing that relationship right now, I think, is really key with your customers and prospects. And ultimately what we've seen is that that relationship and your ability to do that is going to be, I think, a really competitive advantage coming out of this in 180 days when, or whenever that's going to happen, when the economy unfreezes again. Your clients will remember that. And they'll appreciate the fact that you checked in and tried to help them in any way.
Amazing. Yes. And I love that concept of the competitive advantage. I know I've talked to Colin about how I've continually hear that kind of theme coming up with between our advisors, and think it's a really important one to take that perspective.
And there's actually one great phrase that I really like to say at this point. It comes from the TSIA. Helping will sell, selling won't help. And I think it's actually a really great frame of mind to be in right now.
Yeah.
Companies aren't spending a lot of money right now. So trying to push something on them, trying to push a product or a service on them right now when budgets are tight, you know, that's not probably going to go over well, and why people are a little concerned of whether they should reach out or not. But again, coming in from a helpful discovery sort of point of view, I think definitely is the way to go.
Amazing.
Mel, I'd love to add a point on that if I could.
I was going to say, I heard the whole budget's tight and my ears pricked up, and I wanted to pass it to you now to talk about that element.
Yeah, you bet. And actually, before I get into budget, I was going to just extend a little bit to what Colin was saying about, because a lot of what Colin is saying is about relationship maintenance and even relationship building. I mean, it's a great opportunity. People may not be buying right now, but certainly as it relates to your existing customer base, or even certain prospects that you were a bit further along with in your conversation, this is still a good time to just have a conversation and get to know them a little better. That's part one. But part two, it's equally important for you at this time to reach out to both suppliers that you rely on upstream and potentially distributors downstream. If your business model requires you to rely on partners in either direction, it's not only you who's struggling, it's your partners who are struggling. So this is a great time, one, to just check in and say, hey, like, how are things going with you? And what can I do to help you? But also, it's equally important for you to start getting information about, is there a supplier I'm heavily dependent on that's at risk right now?
Right.
If that's the case, do I need to start looking at a second supplier? And then the same with distributors downstream. So that's about relationship building as a whole. It's a critical time to check in with anyone you're reliant on.
Yeah, I know there was a question from someone recently around suppliers and what to do when a supplier lets you down at this particular point in time during a crisis. How do you manage that? I don't know if you have an answer to that, but it came up within the last week.
Yeah, I mean, again, it goes back to the sooner you check in with everyone, and you're basically checking the pulse, and you're checking everybody's pulse. And the reality is, in some situations, you'll discover that a supplier may be at risk, or their channels just suddenly shut down. And then one, you know, and then two, you're looking for alternatives. I mean, we can give you a very real example with a client we work with, Canadian client, a much more established company, not necessarily a startup. But they're in the business of selling chemicals, cleaning chemicals, and but a lot of their bottling components came from China, and a lot of it was plastics. And for years, they've been dependent on importing all that from China. Well, that channel immediately got shut down. And so they had to start looking at other component providers, including in Canada. Could they find somebody to sub in on short notice in Canada? And that began an entire research exercise. So, but the short of it is, those are the kind of things you need to look out for. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Thank you so much. And I also wanted to come back to the conversation around, I have no budget. What do I do? So we've also had a lot of people saying, you know, it's all well and good that I need to think of this as a time to build up my competitive advantage. But the reality is that my budget's really low. How do I just stay open for another day? How do I deal with the fact that I need to continually invest in my company when I don't have the means to do so, and I don't know when those means will come back?
Absolutely. And I mean, the first place I'd ask anyone to start is, I would hope that everyone has a budget. I mean, it starts off with any good business, whether you're a startup or otherwise, you have a financial model in place. It could be a very simple operating budget. So step one now is, if you have that budget, you need to start doing scenario analysis. Starting with, well, if COVID lasts for another month, another 2 months, another 3 months, what could that do to my revenue? And then in turn, if my revenue is going to go down, or if I don't even have necessarily that much early stage revenue, as each month goes by, what are the priority costs that I need to start reducing?
Yeah.
And some of them are a little bit easier. There's some companies that actually, when they look at it, they realize they have some longer term projects that they've been investing some cash in, and they just need to, maybe it's just a matter of putting those on hold. There may be some development work, or there may be a Gen 2, Gen 3 of their technology. And you know what? Just put the brakes on that. That'd be one. Another one would even be just basic office and administration. Another one would be rent. Look, I know a lot of our clients are early stage startups. They may have just made the decision to rent a modest space, or even pay for shared workspace. Well, guess what? All of the corporate world right now, including big blue chips, are working from home.
Yeah.
The reality is, as a startup, maybe you're canceling that rent obligation and you're saving a little bit of money, and everybody's working from home again. So the list goes on. The tougher one gets into, well, when do I need to make the really difficult decision about cutting back on labor? And the main message I would say again here is, reduce hours before you cut jobs. That is probably the most important thing.
Yeah.
And it's a win-win for both you as a company, because nobody wants to see the company fold. But the reality is, for every employee, my suspicions are that most of us would rather have at least some hours than no hours at all.
Right.
And it's a delicate team discussion, but that would be the big thing. And then, of course, the other thing is, I'd say, is at the same time that you're doing all this, look at all the government stimulus packages that are out there and figure out which ones apply to you.
So we'll come back. I think we'll circle back to that one later. And if anyone has particular questions about Canadian government stimulus, Chris knows lots about that in particular, but I think those are great points, and just like keeping up really transparent communications with your team so that you can have those conversations about reducing hours, I think that was one of the best pieces of advice that we got a few weeks ago from Keith here in Vancouver. He mentioned having those transparent conversations, which is super, super important. So we do have a question that came in, but I wanted to first, I'm gonna navigate back to this question though, because there's another Chris question I want to loop down to. Sorry, not down. I don't know what people, I keep saying down because he's right here. Sorry, I'm gonna loop over to Colin first, and then come back to this question that's for Chris. So Colin, something that we talked about as well recently is around, there's a lot of startups in our community who have reached out and who have come to these AMAs that are in really hard hit industries. Particularly travel, for instance, is one that keeps coming up over and over again. So do you have any advice for industries that are particularly hard hit at this time?
Yeah, I mean, again, the reality at this point is not a lot of people are spending money on travel, but the interesting thing is the trends that it's really great to actually keep an eye on the trends that business people and experts are going to say are going to come out of this pandemic actually after it actually ends, or again, when the economy opens up again. So for travel, for instance, one of the things that they're saying is people are going to be jonesing for travel, actually. Now, they may not travel internationally, but they might be dying to go on a road trip to see their brother in Winnipeg. Or so, you know, you have to be realistic with travel and take a look at what people will travel again. There'll be business people certainly that will travel, but people will basically probably initially coming out of this be traveling closer to home. They'll be looking at doing things with family. And those are the kinds of things, if you're in travel, again, to anticipate and to see if you can pivot your service or product in any way that will feed that coming out of it. I was really encouraged actually to read, you know, I went back to some history in a sense of the kinds of companies that have come out of SARS for one, and then actually the 2008 financial collapse. And I think you'll recognize some of these companies, but one was Airbnb, right? Where they came out, they actually started in 2009. And again, it was a reaction to people having a lot of space and another group of people not wanting to spend a lot of money on hotels.
Right.
So, you know, there are opportunities now right away, ultimately, again, just to try to get some money. I'll give you a really quick example. It's very close to home. It's my wife's business. She's actually she has a mobile fashion boutique. Her entire business model is based on going to events and people coming to the house to get fitted. The entire business. That ended immediately 4 weeks ago for her. Yeah. And what she did after getting over the shock after, 2 or 3 days, which people need to go through, is she actually took a step forward. And she had all these projects that were on hold because she didn't have enough time to do it. One was moving a lot of her business online. So what she decided to do was try a Facebook auction with a lot of inventory she wanted to get rid of. About half of her clientele base actually responded. She sold a lot of it off. She got a lot of great feedback on that. And now she's on a path to really moving the business into actually that frame of starting a store online, that type of thing. So she's doing it out of necessity. But the key is she did something. She got feedback from her clients. There's about half of her clients that aren't on Facebook that she's emailing right now, different collections. She's getting response from that. So that's the message, is that there is usually always something that you can do to move the ball forward. And we are in a, things aren't black and white right now. We're in a gray area. And usually at this point, you've got to start experimenting and you've got to try to innovate what it is that you do. And see what sticks.
Right. Mel, I'd love to add one more, and this is so sorry.
Oh, we've got a call.
Sorry, everybody. This is another example, and getting into some specific numbers actually. And it was another client I was working with, and they were in the restaurant business. So another one that's been slammed, and a lot of these restaurants are accustomed to making most of their money off sit-down traffic. Well, of course, what happened is they kind of had to cut back all of their staffing. But as a result, that actually meant that their costs, their burn rate was cut back significantly. Their fixed costs were cut back. But they knew that there was an essential workforce out there, paramedics, hospital employees, government offices, and so forth, that still need food at lunch and dinner. And so then they did some very creative targeted social media and digital online digital marketing in their neighborhoods to say, hey, we've got special meal packages for takeout essential workers. And they were offering upwards of 40% off the menu. But the reason why they could do that is because in that unfortunate situation, they did have to let go of a lot of their part-time wait staff. But it was another example of a pivot that ended up enabling them to maintain revenue, maintain a base level of operation, and become a bit of a winning story within their community. And the best part of this is they will be remembered for that. So that when all this eases off, all of those businesses who appreciated how creative they were with their solutions, you can bet every one of those hospital workers is going to come back and be a loyal customer moving forward.
Yeah. Yeah. Colin.
I've actually got one other great story here, and it's very local. I live in Tawasin. And so I've been helping these guys that started a workspace here, which I thought was a great idea because there weren't a lot of workspaces across the Fraser here on the south side. And well, as you can imagine, 4 weeks ago, their office is empty. Yeah. So they got hit hard. But what they did was they started getting into community business. They were hosting community business chats every Wednesday night. And out of that came a lot of cries for help in a way from local businesses where people weren't shopping at their stores. So what these two guys did with the relationships that they had, and again, just getting feedback from the community, is they've started a local delivery service. Now, they had no experience in that, but you know, they started out getting in their own cars. They're signing up shops actually to be part of this, and they have a real competitive advantage because if you want to order groceries from Save-On right now, you know, you're waiting a week or two, even if you need milk or cheese or eggs or something. These guys can get it to you that afternoon or the day after. So I love that, right? Is that they used their connections, they listened to people, and they sat down and thought, can we provide something right now, which is actually making them a little money, but also just really positioning, it's really supporting what their brand is, which is supporting business in this community. So I just love stories like that. Yeah. It just shows you what people are capable of.
Yeah.
You know what, Melanie, sorry, we're on a roll. I'm going to add one more to that. And it just gives examples of where ideas.
It is good to hear these examples, yeah.
Well, just to kind of deconstruct what Colin just shared with that, he talked about they leverage their networks and their contacts. And that goes back to an earlier point about, we talked about the importance of your business relationships, and not just with your customers, but your suppliers and your distributors. Well, when you have those conversations with your suppliers and your distributors, you may discover that part of your solution is actually talking it out with your supplier or your distributor, because they may actually have ideas working with you together to pivot on your collective model and still make things work. So I guess the message is, don't feel that you're alone. Everyone's going through this. And sometimes it may be your business partners upstream and downstream that may have half the solution for you. So keep talking. Don't isolate yourself. Just keep talking it through.
Yeah. Just reaching out to check in with people is so helpful at this time. That relationship maintenance, which I really liked that term that one of you said. I think Chris said relationship maintenance. Yeah, I really like that. And then listening. I think that's such a key piece that I'm hearing now. Like, reach out to your community, reach out to different kinds of communities and listen to what they actually need and how that relates to what you do. And even if what you then offer doesn't seem obvious, how it's tied back to your original business plan, it's still going to be having that, or building that trust and building your brand for the future as well. Very cool. Okay, so I am going to jump back to the question now that was originally brought up, because I did promise that you could ask Chris this question, which is, what is money modeling and what do you mean by that, and all the things?
Oh, sure. Yeah, no, absolutely. So, and actually, sorry, I've covered up oh my goodness, here, a bunch of questions. Great. I covered that part of the screen. So money modeling is just my sort of simplified way of saying that whatever your business, at the very least, you want to design some sort of a 12-month budget to the best of your ability. And in that budget, you're identifying the different types of way you're generating revenue. And then, of course, there's your costs running a business. And those costs, generally speaking, fall into two categories. There are your variable costs, which fluctuate based on the volume of business. So an example would be, again, going back to a restaurant, the more people you serve, the more food and supplies you need to buy. If nobody shows up in your restaurant, then your variable costs completely disappear. Mm-hmm. So in a challenging situation like this, the good news is your variable costs go to zero, and that's not necessarily a threat to anyone's job or anything like that. Fixed costs are bills you need to pay day in and day out every month that don't change. So rent, base salaries, and other things like that, your power bill, your telephone bill. So the short of it is, money modeling is basically my way of saying, make sure you have a budget, number one, that is projected out a minimum of 12 months. Then part two is, well, what are the scenarios? Well, the scenarios now are, if I'm starting to see a decrease in revenue, how much revenue am I losing? What's that going to do if this keeps going for a month, for 2 months, for 3 months? Yeah. I'll give you an example of a scenario where a seasonality of revenue, for example. Are you, if it's say tourism or hospitality, we're heading into a season where usually in Canada anyway, you're getting significantly more of your revenue June, July, August. Right. That may not be the case now. So yeah. What does that look like? So you model out revenue, and then as soon as you kind of get your head wrapped around that, the tougher part is now looking at your costs and saying, okay, well, I'm going to see a 50% reduction in my revenue. So where and when and how do I need to start cutting costs? And of course, yeah. I spoke a little bit to what that might look like. Yeah.
Okay. So ideally, we would have all done this before this moment in time, but I'm guessing many of us have not done this. So at this moment in time, like if we haven't done a money model and don't have, I have people saying, I don't have a budget, I don't have an accountant. They're in that situation, which we know is a very true situation for a lot of particularly early stage founders or startups. So what is kind of like a next step that they can do that's really tactical in terms of starting to conceptualize their budget?
100%. So, I mean, first off, Google and YouTube are absolutely things. So if you're just looking for a simple template for a budget, you can certainly, like within a matter of minutes, if you just Google operating budget or cash budget, you'll be able to find tons of templates online. Of course, that's what we're here for as well as Volition advisors. If you need an extra helping hand, I mean, I'm more than happy to jump on a call with somebody. But that would be step one for sure. And then, but even before that, I always, and Melanie, I know you've heard me talk about this before, I always say, start with your cocktail napkin numbers. Some of the most effective entrepreneurs I've ever seen, they don't even open up an Excel spreadsheet. If you just take a moment and pour yourself a hot cup of tea or a glass of wine, whatever it may be, just start scratching out, well, where does my money move? Like what are the bills I have to pay at the end of every month? And what has my revenue looked like in the last 3 months? And just start with that and sketch it on paper. That'll start to get you comfortable with understanding how your numbers work.
Right.
Then do the Google thing, and then absolutely reach out to us and we can help you from there.
Okay. And something I'd like to add, actually, it gets back to the first question. One of the things that you should be doing is readjusting potentially what your revenue outlook is going to be. And part of that is actually, first of all, again, when I said protecting your base, is looking at your customer base ultimately. And that is one of the other reasons to connect with them, is to get a good idea ultimately of the kind of revenue that's going to come out of that ultimately, and connecting with your prospects. You need a realistic outlook for the next 3, 6, 9, 12 months. And that's another really good reason to actually get out there and connect with everybody, is it'll give you a very realistic picture of your revenue at this point, which is part of what that whole money model is.
Okay. Thank you so much for covering that for us. Just kind of the basics here today as well. I have a question here that's about, it's a question about customer acquisition, kind of going back to that question, what we were talking about at the beginning about, how, not should I reach out, but yes, I've decided I'm drinking the Kool-Aid, I'm gonna reach out. But my marketing strategy was to meet people in person, go to events. I'm not really comfortable or used to doing it in a virtual space. So how do I meet my clients and prospects now at this time where we're in a virtual space?
Sure. Well, again, you know, using that example of my wife and her business, she is not technically minded in any way. I don't think she'd mind me saying that, actually. But again, she was, I mean, this forced her into actually trying to find other ways other than a face-to-face to connect with her clients. And, you know, the reality is everybody's in the same place right now. Is whether you're a client or a customer, you are being forced to connect with people digitally. And so people are actually getting online a lot more. And one of the things I found really interesting about Mira's talk last week was email response. Open emails are up 40% in the last 3 weeks. That's the kind of thing that's happening right now. So the great thing is, you know, I would say the first thing is you've got to get comfortable doing it yourself. If you're using Zoom, for instance, which a lot of people are getting onto, get comfortable actually how to use it. You know, get yourself a practice on people like anything else. I always say in any kind of sales presentation or conversation or reach out to a prospect, you should really practice it first. Well, it's the same thing doing it this way. Get comfortable with it and then begin reaching out. I think you'll be really surprised at how open people are right now, because many people are at home. They are taking more calls. They have more time for these Zoom sessions. So, and listen, like anything else, I always tell people, if you don't ask, it will never happen. So a lot of what I find it's people actually restricting themselves from actually taking a step forward on this. Believe me, if you start to do this, you'll actually get a lot more comfortable doing it, and you'll see how open people are to this actually. So that's my best piece of advice, is just to get comfortable doing it. And again, a meeting like this, like if you're doing a Zoom session with somebody, you should take it as seriously as a face-to-face, where you're sending them an agenda, for instance, what it is that you'd like to talk about. Do they have anything that they'd like to add to it? Send that to them by email. Many people actually ask them if they're comfortable, for instance, using Zoom. Have they used it before? Because we've all been in those sessions, and you see it on TV a lot today, where somebody hasn't unmuted their button, for instance, right? Or they
worse.
Don't know they're on camera yet, for instance. So actually, you could really help them by saying, if you've not been on Zoom, you know, we send them sort of a little bullet point to-do list on how to even just, you know, when you click on this link, it's going to download on your computer, and just tell them what's going to happen, and then make them at ease actually when it first starts. That'll really help, because a lot of people are coming on right now that haven't done it before. So
yeah.
I
love that. It's very similar to hosting events as well, just putting people at ease so they know it's a safe space. Right. Helps them even just trust you as a human more, which I assume helps if you're selling things.
For sure.
Not that I'm a sales expert, but I assume that's part of it. And I saw that Chris also put his hand up, so I'm gonna scooch on over.
Yeah, no, thanks, Melanie. And again, I think I just want to add to what Colin was sharing, and talking specifically about the good work his wife's doing. I've known them both for years, and I think his wife has a fantastic business and doing really well. I've actually, from time to time, I actually chat with her about some of the tools she's using. What's really interesting about this situation is she's phenomenal with Facebook, but she hadn't been looking at mass emailing solutions for a while. And the reality is, she kind of even admitted she'd kind of been putting it off and procrastinating. So what's really extraordinary about this sort of health crisis we're going through, the way to kind of look at this is it's actually required her to sit down and revisit the way she does business and actually investigate new tools. So the irony is, she's going to be coming out of this in a much stronger position than she was going into it. And I think
Exactly right.
I think my larger philosophical point here would be, and it's kind of like what I said earlier about, first off, don't isolate yourself. Think about all the important relationships in your life. Keep them up. The biggest thing when crisis hits you, one of the most difficult things for all of us, and this is a comment about emotion and faith. A lot of people shut down and they freeze. And the trick is every day, get up and just keep moving, keep your head down. Pick one or two things that are important but manageable, whether it's conversations that you should be having, whether it's a tool you should be investigating, whether it's a money model and budget you should be building. Just keep moving ahead, because I've found in life that with inertia comes solutions. You won't find answers if you just stand still and freak out, basically. But if you just keep every day moving and talking to people and sharing your problems, have the faith that it'll, the answers will come. You just keep moving.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm hearing a lot of the same kind of things coming up over and over again around kind of reframing not only the situation that we're going through right now in terms of that competitive advantage outlook, but even looking at it as competitive advantage, not just for your company, but also for you, because you're learning these new tools. And like you said, you're going to come out stronger because you have every day tried out something new, or every day worked on something. Either it's your own skill set of getting on virtual and speaking, and learning how to maintain or build in that space, or just learning a new audience. Or sorry, Colin.
Yeah, and don't forget, a lot of people are saying that where people may not have ever thought of having a business relationship with a provider online before, and always preferred a face-to-face, in the next 3 or 4 months, there's going to be a new normal here. And a lot of those people actually will find this very convenient actually for them. Where they don't need to get into a car and drive somewhere. You'll still have people preferring that, but more and more, there will be people that will like this model. So therefore, the better you are at this and transitioning into this and offering customers other options to get a hold of you, again, it's going to be a real competitive differentiator, because your competition's in the very same place right now.
Right.
So, as you get better at this, you'll be far better positioned actually with your customer base to thrive when this is actually, when this unfreezes.
Yeah. Okay. Amazing. So I think we've already touched on it a little bit, but there was a question that came in around the crystal ball question, which we cover pretty much every AMA, because there's always a question to this effect around if you were to forecast on what might change in the future and how startups fit into this, what would be your forecast, as much as you can in unprecedented times? No pressure.
That's a big question. Forecasting. So now, do you mean from like a macroeconomic perspective, or do you mean as a single business, how do they forecast and navigate their own existence? That's
a great question, Chris. I think it's kind of around what is the role of startups going to be down the road? Like, how do we, because I know, like we all know it's difficult. The reason we're here and having these AMAs is difficult to survive as a founder startup. Not every startup. Some are actually doing better. We did a survey and over 60% of the founders in our own community are really struggling right now. So that's a large percentage. So, imagining that we do everything that you have just taught us and get through this, what does the getting through this even mean? Like, what do we think is going to happen down the road? How does startups fit into this chaos? What role can we play?
Colin, I'm happy to open up with just a general observation, if that works. Yeah, I think first off, I think we probably want to remember, and I know the community Colin and I really love to support is the startup community, and as does Volition Advisors. But the reality is, whether you're a startup or whether you're, a fully established company that's been operating for 50 years, the reality is that under these circumstances, companies are going to fall into like 3 main buckets. There's going to be some that are absolutely struggling right now. There's going to be a group that are actually, you know what, nothing's really changed. Like basic supplies, milk, bread, toilet paper, nothing's really changed. We need those every day. But then there's going to be a handful of companies that actually are going to have an opportunity to turbocharge what they're doing. Some obvious ones are in the areas of things like certain health-based technologies, remote education and remote learning. Anyone who's touching senior services right now is fully appreciating the vulnerabilities that we have in that sector and the needs that we have. So that's for established business, but certainly for startups as well. I think the reality is that if you keep your eyes open and if you're an entrepreneur that's willing to pivot a little bit, what's interesting about crisis is crisis starts to reveal vulnerabilities, flaws, and problems, societally speaking, across the board. And what entrepreneurs are trained to do is, one, find the problems, and then two, start building solutions. So I think I'd sum it up by saying, if you're an entrepreneur by mindset, right now is a fascinating time to kind of look at society sector by sector and say, wow, like, what have we discovered about our vulnerabilities here? And whether it's using technology or introducing a new service, where can we come up with these new ideas that could lead to, as Colin said earlier, like kind of a new normal or a different type of normal?
Yeah.
That's kind of my broader observation.
Yeah, apparently there's a comment in here talking about, I don't know how to pronounce this person's name, but it ties in with someone named Eben Pagan.
Oh, right. Yes.
That shared, saying that people are going to come out of this either worse off, about the same, or at the next level. So Colin, you have a crystal ball? I probably know the answer to this already, but do you think in terms of the world of sales and customer acquisition and these things, do you see, on top of what you've already shared with us, is there anything that you see changing or not changing?
Well, for sure. I mean, again, I think that the acceleration to digital transformation of the sales process is, it's hit high gear, and any companies that were testing it or thinking about doing it, you've got to get on that road right now. And I mean, the luxury of having a little bit of time right now, assuming that you can cash flow your way through this for the next few months, is you should really be upskilling your company, and you should be preparing it for, I mean, again, there's a no-brainer right now that you need to be at peak with digital performance, whether it's supply chain in the back end, or whether it's actually prospecting and sales and relationship building at the front end. It's an absolute necessity. There's no crystal ball required there. That's going to be absolutely mandatory. So, this is the time to actually get on that and start making sure that you're positioned to actually do that. The other thing I'd say, though, is, again, I'm a big one to take a look. There are going to be very definite trends that come out of this. More people are going to stay at home. What does that mean? There's no doubt that cocooning is actually happening and will continue. As we open up the economy, it's going to be a long time before they're going to open up stadiums, for instance, and large places for people to gather. So more people are going to stay at home. What does that mean? Is there a way that your business can actually help that trend? And there's going to be more efficiencies that are going to be required from government, business, and consumer. Absolutely no doubt, because again, as Chris said, this pandemic actually basically showed some of the warts in the system, and those efficiencies, they are going to be a priority. Can your company in any way pivot to help that, right? Yeah. And listen, I think startups are in a fantastic, if you've been operating a startup for the last year or two or longer, you are used to actually operating in the unknown, at least initially. Larger companies don't have that luxury. It's like moving the Titanic for them. So they're coming out and trying to offer discounts and rebates and things that are very normal for them. But it's not as simple for them to actually pivot with a new business idea and innovate. Startups, that's what you're built on. So in many ways, this is such a competitive advantage over all the startups that have gone through that, that may or may not actually, you may not be in the same business next year, but you may pivot to another business that your expertise, the kind of personnel that you've got, the experience that you have can take advantage of. Right. And that is, and that requires strong leadership and the ability to actually start looking at that right now, right? Right. Yeah, we all have to stop feeling sorry for ourselves because of what happened and take the next step and figure out how can we, I don't like to use the word take advantage, but how can we get ahead of this right now?
Yeah.
Because again, just some of the companies that came out of 2008 are Dropbox, Twilio, Airbnb, Uber, and Square. All of them actually came out of and were modeled to react to a trend that was happening with consumers and with businesses based on the financial meltdown. That's the kind of opportunities that are going to be out there again.
Yeah. Okay. So we're getting some tough love from Colin at this point. But I also heard you need time to work through the crisis, but that's probably at this point in time happened now. And so what are next steps? We're in that point in time of the next steps.
Yeah, for sure. Listen, I'm not trying to minimize the shock that people are going through.
It's okay. We hear you, Colin.
And it was interesting to hear Mira talk about it last week, where there is a bit of a shock to go through. Certainly though, as you're coming out of that, these are the kinds of things that you need to sit down with your team and go, okay, well, what can we do?
Yeah.
Melanie, I'd love to just add one quick thing. Again, just springboarding off what Colin said. We've spoken about education a few times, and we've spoken about the opportunity to try new practices. And as Colin absolutely said, if you are not looking at ways to digitize your internal and external business operations, now is the time to do it. Here's the good news from a cash management standpoint. There's an unbelievable number of digital technologies out there that are offering incredible deals during these COVID times.
Right.
I'm just naming a few. Let me pull up my list. But last I checked, Salesforce, MailChimp, Google Business Services, and even something called Patent Snap, which is for people who are trying to navigate the patenting of technology. These are just 4 examples of digital online platforms that right now, if they're not offering an extended free trial, are offering premium services at a standard rate. So there's all sorts of deals to be had. And here's the reality. One, you should be investigating these regardless. And even the worst case scenario, even if the current business you're working on doesn't pan out, it doesn't survive the pandemic, the research you're doing on these technologies is going to be helping your next startup or wherever you move on to in your career. But it's a great time right now to play around with some tools out there, because there's some great deals for sure.
Yeah. Amazing. Okay. Thank you. I think that answered the question around another question that come up around free resources out that can help us right now. Yeah. I'm cognizant of the time that we have kind of 7 minutes left here. If anyone has any final questions, please do submit them right now. But otherwise, we have kind of enough time to ask Chris and Colin, what is kind of your soapbox conversation right now? What is something that you're hearing asked a lot or something that you wish people were asking more? Do you have anything, last kind of final thoughts?
Chris,
Practical
you want to take
example,
that first?
Yeah, I can jump in first. Sure. And Melanie, thanks again for facilitating all this. You're, as I joked earlier, you're like our very own Ellen DeGeneres, which is awesome. But no,
such a high compliment.
I kind of really had a chance to say 2 things. Again, in the Colin and Chris show, it's the customers and cash show. And so quite often when we work together, I'm thinking back end, I'm thinking cash. But the other thing I'm thinking about is capacity. regardless of the situation, do you have the capacity operationally to sustain yourself? So again, the two things I recommended were, one, really get comfortable with your numbers, go back to your budget and start role playing different scenarios, you know, gradually escalating. Hopefully this won't happen, but after 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, look at what that may mean for revenue and cost. Number two, absolutely look at map out your full supply chain, from suppliers all the way upstream to distributors and your end customer downstream. And don't just think about what's happening to you. Think about everybody up and down that chain. Because one, there could be a real risk there if somebody suddenly disappears on you. But as I said earlier, the flip side is if you get into discussion with these people, you may find creative ways working together to stay in business. The last thing I'd add to those two comments would be, and this goes back to the really tough question about what if I really do need to start cutting my team? I can't just reduce hours. Colin and I always talk about the fact that once you've built a product or service, building a company is about focusing on three core functions: sales, which is about getting customers; operations, which is about managing capacity; and then finance, which is about managing your cash. If you've got to strip down your team, always ensure you still have people who can speak to those three functions. Instead, what we sometimes see is, there's no chance I'm going to sell right now, so I'm going to cut my entire sales team. Don't do that, because the moment you cut your sales team, you lose touch with your customers, you lose some critical corporate knowledge. You now have to find somebody new and train them up from scratch, and that's going to extend your whole recovery cycle. So scale down. I guess what I'm saying is, if you do eventually have to cut jobs, scale down across all three functions. Don't suddenly cut one limb from the body, because that will get you in real trouble. That'd be my soapbox, I think.
Yeah, that was incredible. Yeah, cash and capacity, map out the supply chain, remember to focus on, or to always retain expertise on the team around sales, operations, and finance. I think that's absolute gold.
Thanks, Paul.
And Colin, go.
Yeah, certainly Chris's last point is really key. And, you know, being in the sales area, way too many times I saw companies actually cut their sales team actually down at this point. And ultimately what's going to happen, I mean, if there is any way to keep them, you should, even part-time. Not only do they have the relationships with your customers, often it's them that your customers know, actually, not you, unless you're a single proprietor. But the other thing is, you'll be far better positioned to come out of this on the rebound. Think of how long it takes to hire somebody. Think of how long it takes to train somebody, and then to get them to add value to the company. That can be an 18-month actually life runway there. So think about, you know, if there is a way to keep them, absolutely. And it was interesting because Harvard did a business study after 2008 and looked at companies that just focused on cost cutting in their sales and marketing teams. Absolutely, they did. I forget the percentage, but it was an obvious percentage of that they did worse, and it took longer for them to recover than companies that did not. So the other thing that I just want to mention is get your team together, get your stakeholders together here. You know, document what everybody feels the new reality is. Look at, again, the next 3 to 6 months and see what the reality of that is, what your revenue is going to be. Get their input ultimately in some of the tactics or some of the strategies that they feel actually might be important to do. Connect with your investors at this point, right? I mean, the good news is investors will not necessarily have high expectations at this point for revenue growth, right?
Right.
You've got a bit of a runway probably here, but you need to have those conversations with them right now. So bring everybody in, bring your stakeholders in, and make sure everybody's on the same page here going forward. It's going to help a lot. It's going to ease a lot of concern, actually. And in fact, you'll actually get a lot more support, I think, from internally, from investors, and again, even reaching out to clients at this point, right? The more that you are in this together, the more that you're going to be able to succeed here, for sure. So I really encourage that. Don't go into a cocoon here and hope it's going to go away, or hide what's going on. I think at this point, everybody kind of knows what's going on. Share it, get help, get everybody on board. And again, you'll be far better positioned to not only navigate the next few months here, but to come out of it stronger.
Yeah. And if you are a sole proprietor, reach out to everyone in your network.
Absolutely.
Start there. Start with the people you know.
That's right.
To us.
Yeah,
that's exactly right.
Yeah. Amazing.
Melanie, I'd add one last thing. Colin made a really good point about investors, and I'd actually extend that. Here's the thing, especially if you're a first-time entrepreneur or a younger entrepreneur, you probably have not experienced as many business cycles as some older members of the business community have. But your investors probably have. Certainly some advisors and consultants in the community, including, myself, yourself, and Colin. Well, I won't put you in that category, but Colin and I have a few more gray hairs.
I was around in 2008.
But Colin and I both lived through the recession. Many investors have lived through the recession. We saw what some of the crisis mitigation tactics were that different businesses applied. And so absolutely, Colin's right. Tap into your investors. If you've got board advisors or anyone else who's got a few extra years, because they've probably seen, maybe not something quite like this, but the 2008 recession was pretty tough for a lot of people.
Yeah, there's some trends.
There were some trends.
Yeah.
And we learned a few things about survival.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Lessons learned. Absolutely. Yeah. Yes. I did that as well. I sought out people who have been through at least 1 or 2 recessions just to get some handle on what this looks like, because I was there and it did impact me at the time. I'm not quite as young as I look, but I wasn't working, like I was working in the federal government and I was working, it didn't impact me in the same way. So it was really important for me, who was not in the startup ecosystem at the time, to reach out and see what it looked like for small businesses and startups. So, okay, we are now at and past the hour. So I'm going to reshare my screen just in case anyone didn't see this in the beginning and would like to connect with these 2 gentlemen here who have been speaking for the last hour and just sharing all of their insights, and both, crystal ball, kind of looking into the future, and not so crystal ball, because we know what's coming in some ways, and also sharing a lot of tactical stuff. I always say this, but I took lots of notes. That's when you see me looking down, that's me taking notes. And there was just so much gold here, and we're going to work on capturing that in some sort of post that we can share that will be digestible for everyone. But thank you everyone for coming and joining us. Thank you to those on Facebook. I know we got a really lovely message over on Facebook from a community member, Gordon, saying thank you so much for your insights, and saying it was really, really valuable. So thank you both for being here and sharing all of your knowledge over the past hour. And there's just so much more that you can learn from these 2. I know I've learned so much from them over the past, I don't know, 1.5 or 2 years that I've been lucky to be in their presence. So definitely encourage you to reach out to Chris and or Colin. They are the customers and cash team, and put on masterclasses and all the things as well. So on that note, I just also wanted to mention we are going to continue having Ask Me Anythings. We have one next week that's on managing teams during difficult times. And then we're going to be switching to a slightly different time of day for Tuesdays, but we're going to continue with our Tuesday Ask Me Anythings in May as well. And so we'll let you know more about that. We should have an investor coming in, some experts from the community, possibly some more advisors, or bringing some advisors back to talk to different topics, because they all have lots of different things that they're contributing. And I'll probably do one on virtual events as well. So we have lots coming up. And also tomorrow, actually, we have our first ever global pitch night, which is really, really exciting. And we have, it's really exciting. We had 29 people who applied to pitch from 11 different countries. So we have 8 different countries represented pitching there tomorrow, and an incredible panel. So check out volitionadvisors.com/events and you can see more about that. And I think that's all I have to say. You've now seen this for long enough, so I will stop sharing so you can see their faces again. Yes, thank you, Colin and Chris, so much.
Thanks, everybody. Really,
yeah.
that was great.
Thank you, Melanie.
Really
Yeah, that was great. Stay safe, everybody.
Yes,
Yeah,
and we will share this. It's on our Facebook page. We'll share it on YouTube. Very exciting. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Melanie.
See you later.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.